Ancient civilizations whisper secrets we struggle to understand. The Aztecs, in particular, left behind a spiritual world so intricate and profound that it continues to baffle us centuries later. We are going on a journey into the very heart of that world to explore 30 myths about their gods that are so strange, so contradictory, they seem to defy all logical explanation. By the end, you will see these deities not as simple stone idols, but as complex forces that reveal a breathtaking and sophisticated cosmic vision. We will uncover why a feathered serpent was mistaken for a bearded foreigner, and how a goddess of beautiful flowers could also bring a world-ending flood. What do you believe is the greatest mystery a civilization can leave behind? The very first myth we encounter is perhaps the most stubbornly persistent. It is the image of Quetzalcoatl as a pale-skinned, bearded foreigner, a figure who looks more like a European traveler than a Mesoamerican deity. This idea did not come from ancient Aztec codices or temple carvings. Instead, it was born in the turbulent aftermath of the Spanish conquest. Spanish friars, seeking to make sense of a complex and foreign pantheon, latched onto stories of a wise, bearded priest king who had departed long ago, promising to return one day. They reshaped this figure into a Christianized prophet, a St. Thomas-like visitor who had once preached in the Americas. This narrative served a powerful purpose, suggesting that the Aztecs had been awaiting a Christian return, and thus legitimizing the conquest as a kind of divine fulfillment. The true Quetzalcoatl, however, is a being of breathtaking complexity. He is the feathered serpent, a fusion of the Quetzal bird, representing the sky and spirit, and the serpent, embodying the earth and physicality. He was the god of wind, Tezcatlipoca, whose breath set the sun and moon in motion. He was the morning star, Venus, a brilliant light in the pre-dawn sky. Most profoundly, he was a creator deity who journeyed to the underworld to retrieve the bones of past generations, mixing them with his own blood to create humanity anew. This is not a foreign king, but a fundamental force of life, death, and renewal woven into the very fabric of the Aztec cosmos. The impact of reducing him to a pale visitor is profound. It flattens a rich spiritual philosophy into a simple story of mistaken identity, obscuring the Aztecs' own sophisticated understanding of their world. It turns a deep, indigenous mystery into a colonial plot device. So when you hear that myth, remember the feathered serpent not as a lost European, but as the wind that shapes the mountains and the divine spark that gave humanity life. This obsession with a foreign Quetzalcoatl directly fed into a second, even more graphic myth, one that paints the Aztecs as a civilization drowning in blood. It is the enduring image of Chalchiuhtlicue, the sun and war god, demanding tens of thousands of human sacrifices every single day. This staggering number, repeated for centuries, did not come from unbiased observation. It was a weapon of propaganda, a horrifying figure recorded by Spanish chroniclers like Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who described the temples reeking of blood. By portraying the Aztecs as insatiable monsters, the conquest could be framed not as an invasion, but as a holy rescue mission. Modern archaeology, however, tells a vastly different and more complex story. While human sacrifice was undeniably a central ritual, the scale was nothing like the daily Holocaust described. Estimates from forensic studies of temple remains and historical cross-referencing suggest a far lower, though still significant, annual number, often concentrated around major festivals. The true shock lies not in the exaggerated quantity, but in the profound meaning behind the act itself. To the Aztec mind, the universe was in a constant, fragile state of entropy. The sun needed strength to rise each morning, the rains needed energy to fall. Human life, specifically the sacred force within human blood and hearts, was the ultimate offering, the divine fuel that sustained cosmic order. A sacrifice was not an act of cruelty, but the ultimate act of reciprocity. They believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world and humanity, so humans in turn had a sacred debt to pay. The victim was often treated as a god's living embodiment for days or even years before the ritual, honored and revered. In that final moment, they were not merely killed, they were offered up, their life force sent directly to nourish the sun and ensure another day of life for everyone. This was a cosmology of terrifying responsibility, where human action directly maintained the cycles of nature. Reducing it to mere bloodlust misses the entire point. It was a profound, if unsettling, belief that life required life, a cycle of renewal paid for with the most precious currency imaginable. So the myth of endless daily slaughter crumbles, revealing a deeper, more haunting truth. A people who believed they held the very sun in their hands and whose most sacred duty was to feed it. But if the Aztecs did not see their gods as pale foreigners, how did this entire conquest even happen? This brings us to the third and perhaps most pivotal myth of all, the story that Emperor Moctezuma II believed Hernan Cortés was the god Quetzalcoatl returning from the east. It is a tale of divine confusion that neatly explains a military catastrophe. The narrative is compelling. A hesitant emperor, paralyzed by prophecy, welcomes a foreign invader into the very heart of his empire, leading directly to its collapse. The problem is, there is no credible evidence that Moctezuma ever held this belief. The story appears almost exclusively in Spanish accounts written years after the events, most notably by Cortés himself and the friars who followed. For the Spanish, this myth was a masterstroke of propaganda. It transformed a brutal, opportunistic invasion into a preordained religious event. It suggested the Aztecs willingly, even eagerly, surrendered their sovereignty to a higher power they recognized. This narrative conveniently absolved the conquistadors of moral blame and provided a divine justification for their actions. For the surviving Aztecs, the myth may have served a different, deeply psychological purpose. How does a powerful, sophisticated empire explain its sudden, shattering defeat? One way is to frame it not as a failure of arms or strategy, but as the inevitable working of fate, the return of a god whose will could not be opposed. It turns a military loss into a cosmic event, preserving a sense of dignity and order even in total collapse. The historical reality was far more grounded in human politics and error. Moctezuma was likely not a fearful mystic, but a shrewd ruler attempting to gather intelligence on these strange newcomers. By inviting Cortés and his men into Tenochtitlan, he may have been following a strategy of containment and observation, a disastrous miscalculation of their intentions and capabilities. The true tragedy was not a case of mistaken identity, but a fatal collision of two worlds where diplomacy, curiosity, and strategic gambles were met with unbridled ambition and steel. The myth of the god-king's return is a comforting lie, a story woven to make the unthinkable seem inevitable. It obscures the messy, human drama of fear, ambition, and terrible miscalculation that truly decided the fate of an empire. That same web of human error and cosmic belief reveals a fourth myth, one that centers on the most enigmatic and feared of all the Aztec gods, Tezcatlipoca. His name means smoking mirror, and the common myth suggests this was a simple divination tool, a kind of obsidian crystal ball used to predict the future. This reduces a profound and terrifying concept to a party trick. The smoking mirror was not a window to tomorrow, it was a reflection of the brutal, hidden nature of reality itself. In a world where polished obsidian created a dark, shimmering reflection, Tezcatlipoca's mirror represented the truth that lies beneath all surfaces. It did not show a fixed destiny, but instead revealed the obscured truths, the hidden intentions, and the lurking dangers of the present moment that would shape what was to come. A ruler gazing into it would not see a prophecy of victory, but might see the disloyalty of a counselor or the weakness in his own strategy. It exposed illusions, making it the ultimate tool for a sovereign, which is why Tezcatlipoca was the patron of kings and the relentless tester of their right to rule. This connects directly to his other, more sinister domain, as the Lord of Sorcerers and the Night. Sorcery in the Aztec world was not about casting flashy spells. It was about manipulating the unseen forces that the mirror revealed, the hidden strings of power and fate. Tezcatlipoca was omnipresent and omnipotent, a divine trickster who brought both fortune and ruin. He was the god who overthrew the earlier paradise of the feathered serpent, not out of malice, but to introduce conflict, change, and the hard necessity of struggle into the world. His mirror smoked because reality is never clear. It is clouded by deception, ambition, and chance. To believe it simply told fortunes is to miss the point entirely. It showed the world as it truly was, a dangerous and uncertain place where only the most perceptive and perhaps the most ruthless could navigate the shadows. This makes Tezcatlipoca not a fortune teller, but the embodiment of the cold, unforgiving clarity required to wield power in a universe that was anything but stable. But the Aztec cosmos was not ruled by a single, simple force of destruction. For every god of shadow, there was a counterpart of essential, life-giving power. Yet here we find our fifth myth, one that tries to simplify a profoundly complex relationship between humanity and the natural world. It is the idea that Tlaloc, the great rain god, was merely a benevolent weather deity, a celestial farmer who simply watered the crops. This view could not be more incomplete. Tlaloc was not a gentle sprinkler in the sky. He was the absolute master of all water, in every form it could take. His gifts were vital, but his punishments were legendary. With one hand, he would open the skies, sending the nourishing rains that turned the Valley of Mexico into a fertile paradise. With the other, he could withhold those rains entirely, bringing crippling drought that withered fields and starved cities. He did not just send water, he commanded lightning, the sudden, violent fire from the sky that could split trees and burn homes. He controlled hail and frost, the cold killers that could devastate a harvest overnight. Tlaloc embodied the fundamental truth of agriculture, that life and death are delivered by the same force. The people did not just pray to him for rain, they lived in a state of anxious negotiation, performing elaborate rituals and offerings to appease his volatile temper. Children with specific physical traits, like a double cowlick in their hair, were considered sacred to him, and their tears were believed to be powerful omens of coming rain. This dual nature is perfectly captured in the myth of his paradise, Tlalocan. This was not a heaven for the virtuous in a moral sense, but a specific, watery afterlife reserved for those whose deaths were directly tied to his domain. Drowning victims, those struck by lightning, people who succumbed to waterborne diseases, even those with certain physical ailments like leprosy, were believed to be chosen by Tlaloc. Their bodies were not cremated like others, but buried with seeds and wooden staffs, tools for their journey. Tlalocan was described as a place of eternal spring, with lush green plants and never-ending abundance, a reward for those claimed by the god's power. This reveals a stunning theological concept that the manner of your death determined your destiny, not the quality of your life. It shows Tlaloc's domain was not just meteorological, but deeply spiritual, governing a cycle that linked the most violent acts of nature to the most peaceful of eternal rewards. He was not a simple rain god, he was the terrifying and generous heart of the natural world itself, a reminder that the very force that sustains you is also the one most capable of your destruction. The terrifying power of Tlaloc reminds us that in the Aztec world, creation was inseparable from destruction. This leads us to a sixth myth, one that focuses on a ritual so viscerally shocking it has been branded as the ultimate act of barbaric cruelty for centuries. It is the story of Chalchiuhtlicue, our Lord the Flayed One. The image is undeniably horrifying, priests wearing the freshly removed skin of a sacrificial victim for days as it decayed upon their living bodies. To dismiss this as mere savagery, however, is to look at a seed and see only a dead husk. Chalchiuhtlicue was the god of spring, of renewal, of goldsmiths, and most importantly, of vegetation. His entire being was a walking, breathing metaphor for the most fundamental process in nature. Consider a seed of maize. It is a hard, dry, dead-looking thing. For the new green shoot to emerge and bring life, that outer shell must be broken, shed, and left behind in the earth. The ritual of flaying was a perfect, deliberate reenactment of this cycle. The victim, often a captured warrior, represented the seed. Their skin was the old, lifeless husk. By wearing it, the priest became the living earth itself, incubating new life within the decaying shell. After 20 days, the priest would finally remove the withered skin in a ceremony called the putting off, symbolizing the green shoot bursting forth from the ground. This was not random violence, it was sacred theater on the grandest scale, using the human body to act out the rebirth of the world each spring. The flayed skins were even called golden garments, linking them to the shining new growth of crops and the precious metal worked by Chalchiuhtlicue devotees. To see only cruelty is to miss the profound, even beautiful, logic within the horror. It was a declaration that human life and sacrifice were part of the same agricultural rhythm that fed the empire, a belief that from the most gruesome of deaths came the most essential of births. The ritual forced participants to confront a terrifying truth, that their own survival was literally wrapped in the skin of another's ending. The same terrifying beauty that defined Chalchiuhtlicue reaches its zenith with the seventh myth, the idea that Coatlicue, the Earth Mother Goddess, was a monstrous mother of monsters. Her iconic statue in the National Museum of Anthropology is a masterpiece of controlled horror. She stands with a skirt of writhing serpents, a necklace of human hearts and severed hands, and a head formed by two great serpent heads meeting face to face. It is an image designed to shock and repel, and for centuries it was interpreted as a symbol of pure, mindless savagery. But to see only a monster is to be deaf to the profound theology carved into her stone. Coatlicue, whose name means serpent skirt, was not a bringer of chaos. She was the earth itself in its most raw, honest form. Her fearsome visage was a direct reflection of the world she embodied. The earth is both womb and tomb. It is the soft, dark soil that nourishes seeds and gives birth to all life, the gentle mother. Yet it is also the crushing weight of mountains, the jagged rocks, the deep chasm that swallows everything in the end. Her skirt of snakes represents fertility and rebirth as serpents shed their skin. The necklace of hearts and hands is not a trophy of slaughter, but a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice, the life force that is taken back into the earth to sustain the cycle. She consumes because she gives, and she gives because she consumes. This duality is crystallized in her most famous myth. Coatlicue was sweeping at the temple on Coatepec, Serpent Mountain, when a ball of feathers fell from the sky. She placed it in her bosom, and from this immaculate conception she became pregnant with Chalchiuhtlicue, the sun god. Her other children, the 400 stars of the southern sky and the moon goddess Quetzalcoatl, were enraged by this dishonor and vowed to kill their mother. As the celestial army stormed the mountain, Coatlicue, in her terror, could do nothing. But at the moment of attack, the unborn Chalchiuhtlicue sprang from her womb fully armed. He decapitated and dismembered Quetzalcoatl, casting her body down the mountainside, and scattered her star brothers. This is not a story of a monstrous mother, but of the earth giving birth to the sun itself. Coatlicue is the passive, fertile ground from which the most powerful force in the cosmos emerges to establish order. Her apparent helplessness is her power, her consuming nature is her creativity. She is the silent, enduring planet that witnesses the daily battle between sun and stars, the dark soil from which all light must rise. To label her a monster is to fear the essential truth of our own existence, that we are born from a world that will one day reclaim us, and that within that terrifying cycle lies the only source of life there is. This fluidity of divine identity reveals an eighth myth that tries to impose order where none existed. We often picture the Aztec pantheon as a fixed, organized hierarchy, a neat family tree like those of the Greeks or Romans with clear ranks and unchanging roles. This is a comforting illusion. The reality was a breathtakingly dynamic and complex theological system where gods were not static characters, but fluid forces whose very nature could change. A single deity could have multiple, sometimes contradictory, aspects. Take the god Tezcatlipoca again. In one city, he might be revered as the supreme creator, Tezcatlipoca Ipalnemoni, he by whom we live. In another, he was the fearsome patron of night and sorcery. In a different calendar cycle, he might manifest as the red Tezcatlipoca, Tlaloc, the flayed god of spring, or the black Tezcatlipoca, a shadowy trickster. These were not separate gods, but different faces of the same fundamental, omnipresent power, emphasized based on context. Gods could also merge identities, creating composite deities for specific purposes. Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god, was sometimes worshipped as Huitzilopochtli Tenatia, directly fusing with the blinding solar disk itself during the zenith of his power at noon. This was not confusion, but a sophisticated understanding that divine attributes could overlap and combine like colors on a spectrum. The importance of a god could rise or fall dramatically based on the city-state. In Tenochtitlan, Huitzilopochtli was the supreme tribal patron, the engine of imperial expansion, but travel to the rival city of Texcoco, and the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl might hold that supreme position. A god's prominence also shifted with the sacred calendar. The 260-day Tonalpohualli was not just a count of days, it was a rotating stage where different divine forces took the spotlight, governing specific periods and influencing human fate. Political needs constantly reshaped this spiritual landscape. When the Aztec Empire absorbed a new city, they would often incorporate that city's patron deity into their own pantheon, not to replace their gods, but to add another layer of power and legitimacy, tying the conquered people into a shared cosmic framework. This was a living, breathing theology that reflected the world as they saw it, complex, overlapping, and in constant motion. It was a system designed not for tidy categorization, but for navigating a universe where multiple truths could exist simultaneously, where the god of the morning could be the god of the wind, and where the supreme power in one valley was merely an aspect of a greater force in the next. To force it into a simple family tree is to miss its genius, a spiritual map as intricate and interconnected as the world it sought to explain. That fluid, shifting pantheon had a final destination for nearly every soul, a place whose very name has been twisted by a foreign lens. The ninth myth paints Mictlantecutli, the Lord of the Dead, as a devilish figure ruling over a fiery Christian hell. This could not be further from the truth. His realm, Mictlan, was not a pit of torment, but a vast, silent, and neutral underworld. It was the destination for those who died the most common deaths, from old age to disease. Their journey was not one of punishment, but of arduous passage. For 4 long years, the soul would travel through 9 progressively deeper and more challenging levels, facing obstacles like a river of blood, a mountain of obsidian shards, and a relentless icy wind that could only be crossed with the help of a small yellow dog buried with the deceased. This was a test of endurance, not morality. Upon finally reaching the 9th and deepest level, the soul would find rest, dissolving into nothingness, into the quiet anonymity of the cosmic background. Mictlantecutli himself was not a torturer, but a stern custodian. He and his wife, Mictecaccihuatl, were the guardians of bones, the silent archivists of the physical remains of humanity. This was a crucial role. In the great creation myths, it was Quetzalcoatl who descended into Mictlan to retrieve the precious bones of previous ages, the raw material from which the current race of humans was fashioned. Mictlantecuhtli did not give them up willingly. He set riddles and traps, but he was ultimately part of the cycle. His domain was the necessary repository, the recycling center of existence. He preserved the past so the future could be built. To see him as a satanic figure is to impose a foreign idea of sin and eternal damnation onto a cosmology that had no such concept for ordinary souls. Death was not a moral verdict. It was a difficult journey home to a shadowy rest, overseen by a lord who was less a punisher and more a meticulous keeper of the deepest archives of life itself. The silent rest of Mictlan was only one possible destination, for a soul's fate was decided by the manner of its departure. This brings us to the 10th myth, a chilling equation etched into the very stones of Tenochtitlan, that Tanatia, the sun god, demanded constant warfare to fuel his daily journey. The logic seems brutally straightforward. The sun needs strength to rise, warriors die in battle, their blood is the sacred water that nourishes him, therefore the empire must wage endless war to feed the sun. It is a perfect circle of divine justification for military expansion. But this myth reduces a profound and terrifying cosmic responsibility to a simple imperial slogan. The truth is far more intricate, and it begins not with war but with a cataclysm. The Aztecs believed we live in the fifth sun, the fifth iteration of the world. The previous 4 worlds or suns had been destroyed by jaguars, wind, fiery rain, and flood. The current sun, Tanatia, was born from sacrifice at the ancient city of Teotihuacan. According to the myth, when the world was in darkness, the gods gathered around a great fire. 2 gods were needed to leap into the flames to become the new sun and moon. The proud god Tezcatlipoca hesitated, but the humble, diseased god Nanahuatzin threw himself in without a second thought, emerging as the brilliant Tanatia. Yet this newborn sun hung motionless in the sky. The other gods realized a terrible truth. Creation required not just divine sacrifice, but ongoing payment. To set the sun in motion, to give it the energy to move across the sky, they had to offer their own life force, their own blood. They cut themselves and died, giving their essence to the sun. This established the foundational principle of the universe, a sacred debt, or Nextlahuali. Humanity, fashioned from the bones of the past and the blood of the gods, inherited this debt. Our very existence was a loan from the divine, and the interest was paid in life force in Teolia. This is the crucial concept. Teolia was not just blood, it was the animating spirit, the sacred energy located in the heart. Warfare was one way to collect this precious substance, as the hearts of captured warriors were considered especially potent offerings, the precious water for Tanatia. But it was not the only way. The debt was owed to all the gods who sustain the cosmos, not just the sun. This is where the practice of auto-sacrifice, or Itzpantli, becomes essential. Every person, from the emperor to the common farmer, could and did participate in repaying this debt. Using magi thorns or stingray spines, they would pierce their tongues, earlobes, or limbs, collecting their own blood on strips of bark paper to burn as an offering. This was not a grand spectacle of war, but a quiet, personal act of cosmic maintenance. The myth of constant warfare obscures this universal responsibility. Yes, the state sanctioned wars for captives, and this fed imperial ideology. But the underlying belief was that every drop of blood, whether shed on a distant battlefield or in the quiet of a home, helped pay the interest on the loan of existence. It was a democracy of devotion, a shared burden to keep the sun moving, the rains falling, and the fragile world from slipping back into the eternal darkness from which it came. The battlefield was one temple, but the human body was another. The terrifying idea that existence itself was a debt paid in blood finds its echo in the very substance that sustains life, water. This brings us to the 11th myth, a serene image that could not be more misleading, the belief that Chalchiuhtlicue, she of the jade skirt, was a gentle goddess of rivers and lakes. Her depictions are beautiful, adorned with water lilies and flowing blue garments, the very picture of nurturing fertility. She was indeed the protector of newborns and the patroness of baptismal rites, where infants were presented to her waters. To see only this gentle face, however, is to misunderstand the profound and terrifying power she wielded. In the Aztec cosmos, water was not merely a resource, it was a primordial, chaotic force that both gave life and could utterly erase it. Chalchiuhtlicue embodied this totality. Her most defining myth is not one of creation, but of absolute annihilation. She was the ruler of the fourth sun, the world age that came immediately before our own. During her reign, humanity lived peacefully, nourished by a rain of maize, but the age did not end in tranquility. The myth states that Chalchiuhtlicue grew angry, or perhaps her nature simply turned, and she unleashed a cataclysmic flood upon the world. The skies opened, and water poured forth until the very mountains were submerged and the earth was destroyed. Humanity did not simply drown, they were transformed, changed into fish to survive in the new, all-consuming aquatic world. This was not a random disaster, it was the scheduled, divinely ordained end of an entire cosmic cycle. Chalchiuhtlicue, as the sovereign of that age, was both its sustainer and its executioner. The jade of her skirt symbolized not just the precious stone, but the surface of still, deep water, beautiful and infinitely perilous. This duality is the core of the mystery. The same goddess who cradled infants in her gentle streams was also the force that could dissolve continents. She represents the Aztec understanding that the creative and destructive aspects of nature are not separate, but two sides of the same divine coin. A river that irrigates a field in the spring can flood and wash it away in the summer. The gentle rain that nourishes the seed is kin to the hurricane that uproots the ancient tree. Chalchiuhtlicue's myth teaches that the gods were not compartmentalized by human morality. They were the drivers of vast, impersonal cycles where creation required periodic, total destruction to make way for the new. Her gentle waters held the memory of a world drowned, a reminder that the very element that gives us life is also the one that can, and one day will, reclaim everything. The floodwaters of Chalchiuhtlicue's myth reveal a world bound by terrifying obligation, but that bond was far more complex than simple dread. The 12th myth we must confront is the idea that the Aztecs worshipped their gods solely out of raw, cowering fear of capricious tyrants. This view paints their entire spiritual life as a desperate transaction with unpredictable monsters, a religion rooted in terror. While fear was certainly present, it was only one color in a vast and intricate emotional tapestry. To understand the true nature of this relationship, we must meet a figure known as the Ixiptla. This Nahuatl word is often translated as image, representative, or impersonator, but these terms fall short. An Ixiptla was not an actor playing a part, they were a living vessel, a temporary container for the divine essence of a god. For a period that could last a single day or stretch to an entire year, this person ceased to be merely human. They were dressed in the exact regalia of the deity, given the god's name, and treated with the utmost reverence. If the Ixiptla represented Tezcatlipoca, he would be given fine education, beautiful music, and every luxury. He would walk the streets of Tenochtitlan adorned in flowers, with people bowing and scattering precious feathers at his feet. He was the god walking among them. This period of veneration culminated almost always in a ritual sacrifice, but to see this only as a cruel trick, a brief elevation before a brutal death, is to miss the profound meaning. The Ixiptla ritual was the ultimate expression of a relationship built on reciprocity and even intimacy. The gods were not distant, angry overlords demanding tribute from slaves. They were cosmic partners in a shared, fragile existence. The Aztecs believed they owed their very lives to the sacrifices the gods had made at the dawn of the fifth sun. The human offering, especially one who had been the god's living vessel, was not a terrified victim thrown to a monster. It was the most precious gift they could possibly return, a life for a life, completing a sacred circuit. The care given to the Ixipla was not deception, it was genuine devotion. By honoring the vessel, they honored the god within it. The sacrifice itself was the moment of ultimate connection, where the borrowed divine essence was released and returned to the cosmos, often to nourish the sun or ensure the rains. This was a relationship of profound obligation, yes, but also of mutual need and respect. It was a covenant, a bond so intimate that the divine chose to inhabit human form, and humanity chose to give that form back as the highest form of thanks. To reduce this to pure fear is to strip it of its heartbreaking complexity. It was a theology of love and duty intertwined with necessity, where the most terrible act was also the most sacred gift. The profound intimacy of the Ixipla ritual reveals a world where gods were woven into the very fabric of human creativity and vulnerability. This brings us to the 13th myth, a beautiful but dangerous oversimplification that Xochiquetzal, whose name means precious flower or flower feather, was merely a goddess of beauty and love. To see her as just a divine matchmaker or a symbol of aesthetic pleasure is to miss the immense, often perilous power she held. Xochiquetzal was the patroness of all artists, the divine spark behind every weaver, painter, goldsmith, and scribe. Her domain was not passive beauty but active, skillful creation. The feather and the flower were her symbols because they represented the pinnacle of natural artistry, things of breathtaking intricacy and fleeting perfection that human hands sought to emulate. This connects directly to her patronage of a group often marginalized in other societies, prostitutes. In the Aztec world, these women were seen as skilled practitioners of a complex art, using their bodies and talents to navigate a dangerous social landscape. Xochiquetzal protected them because she understood the vulnerable, creative, and transactional nature of their lives. Her influence extended into the very heart of the household, as she was a goddess invoked during pregnancy and childbirth, moments of intense creativity shadowed by mortal danger. Here, her link to the moon becomes critical. While her brother, the sun god, blazed with constant martial power, Xochiquetzal's lunar aspect tied her to cycles, to the ebb and flow of fertility, to the hidden nocturnal world of growth and secrets. This duality is captured in her most defining myth, a story of abduction that explains her complex nature. Xochiquetzal was originally the wife of Tlaloc, the rain god, living in his verdant paradise Tlalocan. But she was stolen away by Tezcatlipoca, the lord of night and sorcery, who brought her down to the earthly world. This was not a simple love story, it was a cosmic shift. Her abduction by the god of shadows pulled the creative, fertile, and artistic forces she represented out of a static, watery paradise and into the messy, dangerous, and vibrant realm of humanity. It introduced desire, conflict, and the raw materials for art into the human experience. Because of this, Xochiquetzal's beauty was not safe or gentle, it was potent and disruptive. She embodied the idea that true creativity, whether in art, love, or bringing forth new life, requires vulnerability, risk, and a confrontation with the darker forces of desire and change. She was the flower that blooms in a precarious crack in the stone, beautiful precisely because it is fragile and fought for. To reduce her to a simple love goddess is to ignore the steel beneath the petals, the profound understanding that the things we find most beautiful are often born from struggle, carried from paradise into our imperfect world by an act of divine theft. That beautiful, dangerous flower stolen from paradise reveals a deeper truth about the Aztec spiritual world, one that shatters a 14th myth. We often imagine the Aztec pantheon as a brilliant, original invention, a unique set of gods born entirely from their own genius. This idea of a purely Aztec creation is a profound misunderstanding. Their true theological genius was not invention, but absorption and adaptation on a grand scale. They were master synthesizers, building their divine empire by weaving the gods of others into the fabric of their own power. considered Tlaloc the fearsome rain god. His worship did not begin in the marshes of Lake Texcoco. His origins stretch back over 1,000 years to the great metropolis of Teotihuacan, the city of the gods, which had already been a magnificent ruin for centuries when the Aztecs arrived. They found his temples, his imagery carved into the ancient stones, and they recognized a power too great to ignore. By adopting Tlaloc, they were not just taking a weather deity, they were claiming the spiritual legacy of the most revered civilization in Mesoamerican memory, anchoring their new empire in an ancient hallowed tradition. Then there is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. While his concept is ancient, the Aztecs specifically venerated him as a cultural hero inherited from the Toltecs, the legendary master artists and rulers who preceded them. The Aztecs styled themselves as the Toltecs' rightful heirs, and by elevating Quetzalcoatl, they draped themselves in the mantle of that lost golden age, suggesting their rule was a continuation of a glorious, civilized past. Perhaps the most telling example is Tlaloc, our Lord the Flayed One. Historical and linguistic evidence strongly suggests his cult originated with the Yope people, a group from the southern mountains of Guerrero whom the Aztecs eventually conquered. Instead of eradicating the Yope's terrifying god of renewal, the Aztecs brought him into the heart of their capital, Tenochtitlan, and built a major temple in his honor. This was a strategic masterstroke. By adopting the conquered people's most important deity, they performed a spiritual annexation. It signaled that the Yope's gods had now pledged allegiance to the Aztec state, that their power was now subsumed into the imperial project. This process of syncretism was a deliberate political and theological strategy. Every time the Aztec Empire expanded, its priests and rulers would study the local pantheons. They would identify correspondences linking a local rain spirit to their own Tlaloc, or a tribal ancestor figure to Huitzilopochtli. This created a shared cosmic framework, a divine bureaucracy that incorporated new territories not just by force but by spiritual integration. It told conquered peoples their gods were not destroyed, but had taken a new, honored place within the greater Aztec order. The pantheon was not a static, original creation. It was a living, growing mirror of the empire itself, constantly reflecting new lands, new peoples, and new sources of power. To believe the Aztecs invented all their gods is to miss their greatest innovation, building a celestial empire that could expand without end, one adopted deity at a time. Yet this process of divine absorption required a core, a central myth that was uniquely and fiercely their own. That myth is the explosive birth of Huitzilopochtli, a story that is anything but a standard nativity. It begins not in a peaceful manger, but in a moment of profound violation and cosmic terror. Coatlicue, the Earth Mother Goddess, was performing her penance, sweeping the sacred temple atop Coatepec, Serpent Mountain. As she worked, a ball of brilliant hummingbird feathers, a symbol of warrior souls, drifted down from the sky. She gathered it and placed it in her bosom, and from this miraculous, immaculate contact, she became pregnant. This was not a joyous announcement, but a scandal that ignited the heavens. Her other children, the 400 Senson Huitznahua, who were the gods of the southern stars, and her daughter, the powerful moon goddess Coatlicue, were consumed with rage. They saw their mother's pregnancy as a dishonor, a stain on their family's celestial honor. Led by Coatlicue, they resolved to march on Coatepec and kill Coatlicue to erase this shame. The Earth Mother, heavy with child and paralyzed by fear, could only wait as the army of stars and the moon advanced, their fury lighting up the sky. But within her womb, the unborn Huitzilopochtli heard their threats. He spoke to his mother, comforting her, and asked for a shield and a weapon. At the very moment the enraged Coatlicue reached the summit, her weapon raised to strike, Huitzilopochtli sprang forth from Coatlicue's womb. He was not an infant, but a fully grown and armored warrior, his body painted blue, his left leg feathered, and in his hand a mighty Zucoatl, a fiery serpent of turquoise. In a single, decisive motion, he beheaded Coatlicue. He then hurled her body down the mountainside, where it tumbled and broke apart, limb from limb. Turning his wrath on his starry brothers, he scattered the 400 Chalchiuhtlicue across the southern sky, defeating them utterly. This is not a simple story of a god's birth. It is the mythic charter for the Aztec Empire itself. Every element is a political and cosmic allegory. Huitzilopochtli, the patron god of the Mexica people, is the sun. Coatlicue, his dismembered sister, is the moon. The 400 brothers are the stars. The myth enacts the daily victory of the sun, which at dawn defeats the moon and scatters the stars, asserting its dominance over the sky. But for the people of Tenochtitlan, this was far more than astronomy. It was their divine right to rule. Coatepec, Serpent Mountain, was symbolically recreated at the very heart of their capital as the Templo Mayor, the Great Pyramid. One side was dedicated to Tlaloc for rain and agriculture. The other side, painted bright red for war and the rising sun, was the sacred Coatepec, the temple of Huitzilopochtli. At its base, archaeologists discovered a massive, circular stone carving depicting the dismembered body of Coatlicue. This was not mere decoration. It was the ritual stage. Prisoners of war captured from rival cities would be led up the steep steps of the pyramid, reenacting the ascent of the attacking stars. At the summit, their hearts would be offered to Huitzilopochtli, and their bodies would be cast down the steps to land upon Coatlicue stone image, literally repeating the moon's defeat. Every sacrifice was a reenactment of the foundational moment, a reaffirmation that the sun would rise, that order would triumph over chaos, and that Tenochtitlan, the city born of this myth, held a divine mandate to conquer and subdue all who opposed it, just as their god had subdued the celestial armies at the dawn of time. But the brilliance of the sun god's birth myth casts a long shadow, one that forces us to question another comfortable assumption. The 16th myth insists that Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was always a purely benevolent force, a wise and gentle god of creation and civilization. This romantic view, however, smooths over the complex, often shadowy edges of his true nature. To see him only as a peaceful teacher is to ignore the stories where he operates as a divine trickster, a figure of profound ambiguity. In one crucial cycle of myths, Quetzalcoatl is not the victor but the vanquished. He ruled over a legendary golden age in the city of Tolan, a time of perfect peace and abundance where cotton grew in brilliant colors and food was plentiful. But this paradise was shattered by his eternal rival, Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror. Tezcatlipoca did not attack with an army, he used cunning and illusion. He appeared to Quetzalcoatl as an old man, showing him his own reflection in a mirror. For the first time, the feathered serpent saw himself not as a divine being, but as a mortal man with human imperfections and limitations. This act of self-revelation was a devastating blow to Quetzalcoatl's divine identity. Tezcatlipoca then tricked him into drinking pulque, an intoxicating beverage, which led Quetzalcoatl to break his own priestly vows in a night of shame. Disgraced and his power broken, Quetzalcoatl was forced into exile, setting his city ablaze and departing toward the east. This myth explains the end of a golden age, but it also reveals Quetzalcoatl's vulnerability. He is not an all-powerful, infallible good, but a god who can be deceived, who can fall from grace, and whose perfect order can be overturned by chaos and trickery. His benevolence had a limit, and his story includes a chapter of failure and flight. This complexity deepens when we examine his fusion with Ehecatl, the wind god. As Quetzalcoatl, he is the breath of life that sets the cosmos in motion, the gentle breeze that carries rain clouds, but wind is never only gentle. The same force that scatters seeds can become a hurricane that flattens cities. Ehecatl could bring the life-giving storms, but he was also the destructive tempest, the whirlwind that uprooted trees and leveled temples. His temples were built as circular structures to minimize wind resistance, not as serene halls for a passive god, but as practical acknowledgments of a raw, untamable power. This dual capacity is key. The feathered serpent who gave humanity maize and the arts is also the wind that can erase all human works. He is the god who descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of humanity, a heroic act, but one achieved through trickery and guile, outwitting the Lord of the Dead. He is order, but an order born from struggle and maintained by a force that contains its own potential for violence. To sanitize him into a simple symbol of good is to strip him of his divine weight. He represents not perfect goodness, but the necessary and creative tension between order and chaos, between the breath that gives life and the gale that reminds us of our fragility. He is a god who built and lost a paradise, reminding us that even the most civilizing forces are subject to the unpredictable storms of fate. The shadowy complexity of Quetzalcoatl forces us to confront an even more difficult mystery, one that lies at the very heart of Aztec ritual. Myth 17 presents a stark choice that sacrificial victims were either always willing martyrs seeking a glorious death, or always terrified slaves dragged screaming to the stone. The truth, as always, refuses such simple categories. It existed in a vast and unsettling gray area, a spectrum of experience shaped by belief, status, and brutal necessity. On one end, there was the ideal, immortalized in song and story, the captured warrior. For a young man raised in a culture that venerated martial prowess, to be taken in battle was not the ultimate failure but a cosmic lottery win. He was given a new name, Chalchiuhtlicue, meaning one who dies in a divine manner. He was treated with honor, often housed and fed well in the months leading to his sacrifice at a major festival like the Feast of the Flaying of Men. His death on the Tezcatlipoca, the gladiatorial stone, fighting against elite Aztec warriors, was a public performance of ultimate courage. His heart offered to the sun was believed to join the celestial army accompanying Chalchiuhtlicue across the sky. For him, the line between coercion and honor may have been blurred by a lifetime of cultural conditioning, where this fate was seen as a preferable, even glorious, alternative to a mundane death from disease or old age. But this was just one thread in a much darker tapestry. Not all offerings were valiant warriors. Slaves, often purchased specifically for sacrifice, populated another tier. Their experience lacked the warrior's honor. They were commodities, their lives a transaction to appease the gods during times of famine or disease, or to dedicate a new temple. Their consent was irrelevant, their fate decided by their economic value as a ritual object. Then there are the most haunting offerings of all, the children given to Tlaloc. These were not captives or slaves, but often the children of noble families or those selected for specific physical traits, like two cowlicks in their hair, which marked them as belonging to the rain god. They were treated with immense reverence, dressed in fine costumes and paraded through towns as living idols. Their tears were considered potent omens, so priests would sometimes deliberately make them cry on the long processions to the mountain shrines where they would be offered. Here, the intertwining of genuine belief and profound horror is at its most acute. The parents and community likely believed they were giving their child to a vital, divine purpose, ensuring the rains would come and the world would continue. This does not erase the unimaginable grief, but layers it with a devastating cultural logic where love and duty demanded the ultimate price. Finally, consider the Ixiptla, the god impersonator, who lived for a year as a deity incarnate. For that year, they were showered with every luxury, revered by all, and treated as the divine presence on earth. Yet they knew from the first day that their reign ended on the stone. Was this willing sacrifice, the immense social pressure, the total immersion in a divine identity, and the belief that they were fulfilling a cosmic role that transcended individual life, all point to a psychological state far beyond simple willingness or fear? It was a form of sacred conscription where the person was slowly dissolved into the role, making the final act not a personal death, but but the shedding of a divine costume so the essence within could return to the gods. To claim all victims went willingly ignores the stark reality of slavery and the terrified tears of children. To claim they were all terrified ignores the powerful cultural narratives that could frame a warrior's death as the pinnacle of existence. The practice was held together by this very tension, a society-wide belief system so powerful it could motivate a parent to offer a child, a warrior to embrace capture, and a community to watch, believing their own survival depended on it. It was not a single emotion, but a chilling alloy of faith, duty, social pressure, and raw power, forging a practice that sustained a worldview where life, in all its beauty and terror, was the ultimate currency. The terrifying gray area of sacrifice reveals a world where power was never simple or clear. This brings us to the 18th myth, a direct product of colonial fear, that Tezcatlipoca was the Satan of the Aztec world, a pure embodiment of evil. To label him as a devil is to force a foreign, dualistic morality onto a god who defied such easy categorization. He was the lord of the night, the patron of sorcerers, and the bringer of conflict, yes. But he was also Tezcatlipoca Ipalnemoni, he by whom we live, a supreme creator. He was the divine judge who tested kings, granting them authority or stripping it away based on their worth. He was the force of inevitable change, the divine catalyst without which the world would stagnate and die. His very name holds the key to understanding this paradox. Tezcatlipoca means smoking mirror. In a time when mirrors were made of polished obsidian, they produced a dark, shimmering reflection, clouded by the stone's natural imperfections. This was not a flawed tool, it was a perfect metaphor. The smoking mirror did not show a clear, simple image of the world. It revealed the obscured truths, the hidden motives, the dangerous potential that lurked beneath every surface. A king gazing into it would not see a flattering portrait, but the disloyalty of an advisor, the weakness in his own heart, or the looming threat from a rival city. It showed reality as it truly was, not as one wished it to be, a reality often clouded by deception, ambition, and the smoke of uncertainty. This is why he was the patron of rulers. To wield power effectively, one had to see through illusions, to navigate the shadows where true threats and opportunities resided. His association with sorcery, or nahualism, was an extension of this. Sorcerers were those who learned to manipulate the hidden forces the mirror revealed, the unseen threads of fate and energy that wove the world together. Tezcatlipoca's most famous myth illustrates his necessary disruptive role. He was the god who overthrew the peaceful paradise ruled by Quetzalcoatl in the legendary city of Tolan. He did not do this out of petty malice, but to shatter a static, perfect order. By introducing conflict, temptation, and imperfection, he forced the world to move forward, to struggle, and to evolve. He was the divine agent of destiny, Tlaloc, the one who walked among men, distributing fortune and ruin seemingly at random, reminding everyone that fate was not a straight path, but a precarious journey through shadows. To call him Satan is to mistake a fundamental law of the universe for a villain. The Aztecs did not worship evil, they recognized a terrifying truth, that creation requires destruction, that order requires challenge, and that truth is often found not in the bright light, but in the difficult clarity of the smoking mirror's dark reflection. The shadowy clarity of Tezcatlipoca's mirror reflects a truth about time itself, one that modern pop culture has spectacularly misunderstood. A 19th myth insists the Aztec calendar predicted a cataclysmic end of the world in 2012. This idea is a perfect storm of historical confusion, blending two distinct civilizations and imposing a linear, apocalyptic fear onto a culture that thought in sacred cycles. The famous calendar that sparked global fascination was not Aztec at all, but the Maya long count, a magnificent and intricate system of tracking vast epochs. The Aztecs, inheritors of a broader Mesoamerican tradition, had a profoundly different relationship with time, one centered not on a final end date, but on the fragile, renewable bond between humanity and the cosmos. Their timekeeping was built on two interlocking wheels. The first was the 260-day sacred calendar, the Tlaloc, a divinatory almanac that dictated the fate of days and the patrons for each period. The second was the 365-day solar year, the Tlaloc, which governed agricultural and civic life. These two cycles, like immense geared wheels, turned independently. Imagine a smaller wheel with 260 teeth meshing with a larger wheel with 365. They would only realign at the same starting point once every 52 years. This period was the Aztec century, the calendar round, and its completion was called the Tlaloc, the binding of the years. This was not a countdown to doom, but a moment of supreme cosmic danger and opportunity. As the final days of the 52nd year approached, a profound terror gripped the empire. The Aztecs believed the sun was old and weary, that the gods might simply decide not to renew their covenant with humanity. If the rituals failed, the world would not explode in fire or ice, but would simply stop. The stars would become demons, the Tezcatlipoca, and descend to devour the last of mankind, leaving the earth in perpetual, silent darkness. To prevent this, they performed the most vital ceremony of their existence, the new fire ceremony. On the last night of the cycle, every fire in every home, temple, and palace across the land was extinguished. The world was plunged into intentional blackness. Priests and a chosen warrior would ascend the Hill of the Star, a volcano overlooking the Valley of Mexico, and watch the night sky. All eyes were fixed on the star cluster we call the Pleiades. If it passed directly overhead at midnight, it meant the universe had consented to continue for another 52 years. At that precise moment, on the chest of a captive warrior representing the god Tezcatlipoca, a priest would use a fire drill to kindle a new flame. This first spark, born from human ritual, was the rebirth of time itself. Runners with torches lit from that sacred source would carry the new fire to every city, town, and village, where hearths would be relit in a wave of celebration. It was not an apocalypse, but a renewal. The old cycle was not destroyed, it was bound and a new one begun. The world was saved not by a hero's battle, but by a perfectly timed ceremony and a collective act of faith. The myth of 2012 imposes an ending where the Aztecs saw only another turn of the wheel, a moment to relight the fire and reaffirm their sacred duty to keep the cosmos alive for 52 more years. The young god Chalchiuhtlicue, sprouting green from the earth, seems to confirm a simple truth that the Aztecs were utterly obsessed with maize. It is an easy conclusion to draw, seeing their intricate agricultural calendars, their towering granaries, and their pantheon filled with corn deities. But to call this an obsession is to mistake a deep, spiritual reverence for a simple fixation. Maize was not just a crop, it was the literal substance of humanity, a divine gift that required a sacred partnership. According to their creation myths, the gods had tried to fashion humans from mud and from wood, but those attempts failed. It was only when Quetzalcoatl retrieved the bones of the ancestors from the underworld and the gods ground them into a flour, mixing it with their own precious blood, that true humanity was born. That flour was ground maize. In a very real sense, the Aztecs believed their flesh was made of corn dough. To eat a tortilla was not just to consume food, it was to ingest the very material of your own being, a constant ritual of self-renewal. This is why the life cycle of the maize plant was not merely agricultural, it was the central drama of existence mirrored perfectly in their gods. The young green maize was personified by Chalchiuhtlicue himself, a handsome youth who embodied the tender, growing stalk. But his story does not end in perpetual youth. In one vital myth, Chalchiuhtlicue buries himself in the earth, and from his body sprout all the vital food plants, with maize being the most precious. This is a god who dies to become the food that sustains life, a direct echo of the sacrificial logic that fueled the sun. His female counterpart, Chichimequotl, Seven Serpent, was the goddess of mature maize, of the nourishing ear full of kernels. She was often depicted carrying a double ear of corn, her very being the promise of abundance. Yet her festivals could involve the sacrifice of a young girl representing the goddess, whose severed head was then paraded as a sacred seed. The growth of maize from a hard seed buried in the dark earth to a green shoot to a golden harvest was a continuous narrative of death, sacrifice, and rebirth. This is why the terrifying ritual of Tlaloc, the flayed one, makes profound sense in this context. The priest wearing the decaying skin was not just honoring a spring god, he was acting out the fate of the maize seed itself, its outer husk dying so the new life within could burst forth. Every stage of the corn's life had a divine custodian, from the earth mother who received the seed to the rain god who nourished it to the sun god who ripened it. To farm was to participate in a divine play, to coax a piece of deity from the ground through ritual, sweat, and often blood. The relationship was one of profound reciprocity. They cared for the maize as they would care for a god, because they believed the maize was a god, the physical form of the sacred force that animated their own bodies. It was not an obsession with a plant, but a recognition of a fundamental kinship, a bond so deep that to break it would mean the end of humanity itself. That sacred bond with maize was physically anchored in the very heart of the empire, at a place whose true purpose has been tragically narrowed by history. The Templo Maya was far more than a stage for mass execution. To see it only as a killing floor is to misunderstand its role as the spiritual and cosmic engine of Tenochtitlan. It was a meticulously constructed sacred mountain, a replica of Coatepec where Huitzilopochtli was born and triumphed over the moon. Its twin staircases leading to the shrines of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc did not just honor two gods, they represented the fundamental pillars of Aztec existence: war and agriculture, sun and rain. But its significance ran even deeper. The temple was an axis mundi, a world axis believed to pierce through the three layers of the cosmos. Its foundations plunged into the watery underworld of Mictlan. Its body stood on the earthly plane, and its pinnacle touched the 13 heavens. Every offering, from the simplest clay figurine to the most elaborate sacrifice, was an act of communication along this vertical conduit, a way to send energy and messages between the realms. While the summit witnessed the ultimate offering of the heart, the vast plaza below was a stage for vibrant, continuous life. It thrummed with the rhythms of sacred dances performed by guilds of professional dancers adorned in brilliant feathers and bells. The air filled with the haunting music of conch shell trumpets, clay flutes, turtle shell drums, and the chilling whistle of human bone rasps. Priests burned copal incense, sending aromatic smoke curling toward the heavens as a form of prayer. The temple complex also housed the Commacac, the elite school for priests and nobles, where astronomy, theology, and history were taught. It was a political theater where the emperor displayed his power, receiving tribute from conquered lands and redistributing it to the people. Offerings were buried at every stage of the temple's construction and expansion, not just bodies, but exquisite works of jade, obsidian, coral, and the skeletons of sacred animals like jaguars and eagles, all placed to consecrate the space and anchor its power. The Templo Maya was a living, breathing nucleus. It was a university, a concert hall, a political stage, and a cosmic antenna, all designed to maintain the delicate balance of a universe that depended as much on song, dance, and study as it did on the final, solemn act performed at its peak. The intricate world of the Templo Maya was built upon a single, terrifying question: what if creation was not a one-time event but a cycle of catastrophic failures? This leads us to the 22nd myth, the idea that Aztec mythology lacked a coherent creation story. The truth is not an absence of narrative, but an overwhelming abundance of it, a layered and complex cosmogony that explains not just how the world began, but how it ends and begins again over and over. Their central creation myth is not a single act but a series of 5 attempts, known as the Legend of the 5 Suns. Each sun represents an entire world age, populated by a different race of beings, and each age met a violent, divinely ordained end. The first world, the Sun of Earth, was inhabited by giants. It was destroyed when the jaguar deity Tezcatlipoca, in his form as a great jaguar, caused the sun to fall from the sky, and the giants were devoured by these monstrous cats. The second age, the Sun of Wind, was ruled by Quetzalcoatl. This world was swept away by catastrophic hurricanes, and its people were transformed into monkeys. The third, the Sun of Rain, was governed by Tlaloc, the rain god. It ended in a torrent of fiery lava, a rain of fire that consumed everything. The fourth world, the Sun of Water, was presided over by Chalchiuhtlicue, the water goddess. Her era concluded with a global flood that turned humanity into fish. These were not random disasters, but the scheduled conclusions of cosmic cycles, each world falling when its ruling god could no longer maintain the balance. This brings us to the pivotal moment, the birth of our own world, the fifth sun. After the fourth flood, the gods gathered in the darkness at the ancient, sacred city of Teotihuacan. A great fire burned, and they faced a terrible dilemma. A new sun was needed to illuminate a new world, but it required the ultimate sacrifice. A god must leap into the divine flames to become the sun itself. 2 deities stepped forward. The first was Tezcatlipoca, a proud and wealthy god adorned in fine jewels and rich feathers. The second was Unraveling, a humble, poor, and diseased god, covered in sores and clad in simple paper garments. When the time came for the sacrifice, the proud Tezcatlipoca hesitated at the edge of the blazing furnace, his courage failing him 4 times. But Unraveling, without a moment's pause, gathered his resolve and hurled himself into the heart of the fire. Shamed by this act of ultimate humility, Tezcatlipoca finally followed. From the flames, 2 suns rose into the sky, Unraveling as the brilliant, blinding sun, and Tezcatlipoca as the moon, glowing with a dimmer light because he had hesitated. But a new problem emerged. The sun hung motionless in the sky, scorching the earth below. The other gods realized another terrible truth. The sun would not move without a sacrifice to fuel its journey. To give the sun life, they now had to give their own. One by one, the gods cut themselves, offering their blood and their lives to set the sun in motion across the heavens. This act established the fundamental covenant of the fifth sun, the sacred debt that every living being would inherit. The Aztecs believed they lived in this precarious fifth iteration, the sun of movement, destined one day to be destroyed by earthquakes. Every ritual, every drop of blood offered, every heart given to Huitzilopochtli was an effort to pay the interest on that original divine loan, to keep this fragile, final world from trembling apart. Their creation story was not a simple beginning. It was a chronicle of repeated endings, a cosmic lesson in humility and sacrifice, explaining why their world demanded such a terrifying and constant price. The fragility of the fifth sun demanded not just sacrifice, but also a sacred release, a divine gift that could bind communities together in the face of such cosmic pressure. This brings us to the 23rd myth, the idea that deities like Mayahul were simple nature spirits, charming but minor figures in the vast pantheon. To dismiss her as just the goddess of the Megi plant is to miss the profound and intoxicating story of how ecstasy itself was discovered. Mayahul was a young, beautiful goddess who lived in the sky with her grandmother, a fierce and possessive star demon named Tezcatlipoca. Confined and watched over, Mayahul represented a potential, a latent power trapped in the heavens. Her liberator was none other than the feathered serpent himself, Quetzalcoatl. He journeyed to the sky not to wage war, but to perform an act of divine theft, recognizing the gift Mayahul held within. He transformed them both into a forked tree to hide from the grandmother's wrath, but when the star demon discovered them, she shattered the branch where Mayahul was hidden. Devastated, Quetzalcoatl gathered the broken pieces of the young goddess and buried them in the earth. From these sacred remains, the first Magi plant grew, its thick, fleshy leaves and central heart, the piña, rising from the ground. This was not a death but a transformation. Mayahul's body became the plant itself, and her divine essence fermented within it, becoming the milky, frothy beverage known as pulque. This myth is a masterclass in Aztec theology. It explains the origin of a vital resource, but it does so through a narrative of liberation, tragedy, and metamorphosis. The Magi was far more than a crop. It was the physical incarnation of a goddess who escaped the sky to become one with the earth. Pulque, therefore, was not just an alcoholic drink. It was Mayahul's blood, her sacred sap, a liquid form of her divine spirit. This connected her to profound dualities. She was a goddess of fertility, as the Magi provided food, fiber, needles, and building material, sustaining life in countless practical ways. But through Pulque, she governed ritual intoxication, ecstasy, and communal joy. Drinking Pulque was not mere recreation. It was a form of communion with the goddess, a way to temporarily step outside the rigid confines of daily life and social hierarchy. In controlled, ritual settings, Pulque facilitated a sacred connection to the divine, unlocking visions and a sense of unity. It was served at weddings, births, and agricultural festivals, binding communities together in shared celebration and reinforcing social bonds. Mayahul's gift was a necessary counterbalance to the stark reality of blood debt and cosmic duty. She provided a sanctioned outlet for release, a divine permission to experience collective joy and altered states, all flowing from the story of her own sacrifice and rebirth. She was not a simple plant spirit, but the embodied spirit of transformation, showing that even from an act of violent shattering, a gift for all humanity could take root and bloom. Yet the intoxicating story of Mayahul was never written down in a single, authorized book. This brings us to the 24th myth, the idea that the Aztecs possessed a unified religious text, a kind of sacred Bible that contained all their doctrines in one place. This is a projection of our own cultural expectations onto a civilization with a profoundly different relationship with knowledge. The Aztecs did not have a central, canonical scripture. Instead, their sacred wisdom was a living, breathing tradition held in three fragile vessels: memory, art, and books that were meant to be performed, not simply read. The most important vessel was the human mind itself. A vast library of myths, rituals, histories, and astronomical data was memorized and transmitted orally by specialized priests and wise elders, the Tlaloc. This oral tradition was not a primitive fallback. It was a sophisticated technology of memory. Knowledge was woven into poetic verse, chants, and rhythmic narratives, making it easier to recall and pass down through generations. This very method guaranteed variation. A story told in the Comicac school of Tenochtitlan might have subtle differences from the version recited in Texcoco or Tlaxcala, adapting to local history and emphasis. The second vessel was the ritual and the image. Complex theological concepts were encoded into the architecture of temples, the patterns on pottery, the vivid murals on palace walls, and the elaborate performances of dance and sacrifice. You learn the story of Chalchiuhtlicue not by reading it, but by witnessing a captive warrior ascend the steps of the Templo Mayor and seeing his body cast down upon the stone disc of Coatlicue. The third vessel was the codex, but these were not books as we understand them. Pre-conquest codices were screenfold books made of deerskin or bark paper, painted with brilliant, symbolic images. They were not meant to be read word for word, but to serve as mnemonic prompts, a series of visual cues that a trained priest would use to reconstruct a full recitation of a ritual calendar, a genealogy, or a myth. Tragically, almost all of these original books were systematically destroyed by Spanish missionaries who saw them as instruments of the devil. The few that survived, like the Borgia Codex, give us breathtaking glimpses into this lost visual language, but they are fragments of a shattered whole. What we rely on today are post-conquest documents created in the decades after the fall of Tenochtitlan. The most famous is the 12-volume Florentine Codex, a monumental work supervised by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagun. He worked with elite Nahua scribes and artists, interviewing elders and having them paint scenes of life before the conquest. It is an invaluable treasure, but it is also a filtered lens. The information was gathered under Spanish rule, organized by European categories, and intended to help priests root out lingering idolatry. The indigenous voices within it are profound, but they are speaking across a canyon of recent trauma and colonial pressure. So when we seek the Aztec religion, we are not opening a single holy book. We are piecing together a mosaic from charred fragments, colonial transcripts, and the enduring echoes of chants that once filled the air of a plaza that is now a silent archaeological site. Their sacred text was the world itself, read in the stars, performed in blood and flowers, and remembered in the hearts of those who believed they were keeping the sun alive. That fragmented mosaic of memory and conquest forces us to reconsider figures relegated to the dusty corners of legend. Myth 25 dismisses gods like Mixcoatl as merely legendary hunters, primitive figures left behind by a more sophisticated pantheon. This view fails to grasp the profound nostalgia and cosmic identity he represents. Mixcoatl, whose name means cloud serpent, was far more than a god of the hunt. He was the divine embodiment of the Aztecs' own nomadic, barbarian past, the wild seed from which their glittering civilization painfully grew. Before they were the masters of Tenochtitlan, the Mexica people were Chichimecs, fierce desert wanderers clad in animal skins, living by the bow and the spear. Mixcoatl was their patron, the deification of that entire way of life. He represented the raw, untamed power of the frontier, the skill and brutality required to survive in the harsh wilderness beyond the cultivated fields of settled empires. Every arrow shot, every successful hunt was an act of communion with him, a rehearsal for warfare and a tribute to the ancestral skills that forged them as a people. But to see him only as a hunter is to miss his staggering celestial identity. Mixcoatl was also the Milky Way. That vast, starry river arching across the night sky was visualized as a great serpent made of clouds and starlight, a celestial hunter eternally traversing the heavens. This connection is crucial. It tied the most mundane act of survival, the hunt, to the grand architecture of the cosmos. The path of the Milky Way was his road, the stars were his campfires, or perhaps the countless animals of the celestial plain. This stellar aspect transformed him from a local spirit into a universal force, linking the destiny of nomadic hunters to the very fabric of the night. Most pivotally, Mixcoatl appears in several key traditions as the father of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. This genealogy is a profound piece of theological poetry. It tells the story of civilization's own birth. The wild, celestial hunter, the cloud serpent of the untamed frontier, fathers the feathered serpent, the god of wind, wisdom, priests, and the cultivated arts of city life. It is a myth of cultural evolution in divine form. From the raw, stellar power of the nomadic past, symbolized by Mixcoatl, emerges the refined, civilizing force of Quetzalcoatl. This relationship encapsulates the Aztecs' own journey, from desert wanderers to builders of a majestic island metropolis. They never forgot their origins, they enshrined them in the stars and made their founding father a god who hunted among the constellations. Mixcoatl was not a forgotten relic, he was a sacred reminder, a divine anchor to their authentic, rugged beginnings, proving that their towering temples and complex calendars were born from the dust of the trail and the light of the Milky Way. The true terror of the Aztec century was not a prophecy of fiery doom, but the silent, creeping dread that the universe might simply choose to stop. This brings us to myth 26, the dismissive idea that rituals like the new fire ceremony were mere superstitious nonsense, primitive magic with no real weight. To see it that way is to miss the staggering existential gamble at its heart. Every 52 years, when the sacred 260-day calendar and the solar 365-day calendar completed a full cycle and realigned, the Aztecs faced what they called the Tzumilpili, the binding of the years. This was not a celebration, it was a moment of supreme cosmic vulnerability. They believed the sun, Tanatia, was old and weary, that the sacred covenant forged by the god's sacrifices at the dawn of the fifth sun was about to expire. If the rituals failed, the world would not end with a bang, but with a whimper, a final, eternal darkness. The stars would transform into ravenous demons, the Tzimime, and descend to devour the last remnants of humanity. To prevent this, they enacted a ceremony of breathtaking audacity, a collective act of faith that held the fabric of time together. In the final days of the old cycle, a solemn silence fell across the entire empire. Every single fire was meticulously extinguished, from the humble hearth in a farmer's hut to the perpetual flames in the grand temples. Pottery was smashed, household altars were dismantled, and pregnant women were locked in granaries, feared to become monsters if the ceremony failed. The empire voluntarily plunged itself into a symbolic darkness, a world without heat, light, or spiritual warmth, mirroring the potential and they sought to avert. On the Hill of the Star, a sacred mountain overlooking the Valley of Mexico, priests and a chosen, flawless captive awaited the celestial sign. All eyes were fixed on the star cluster we call the Pleiades, known to them as the Chalchiuhtlicue, the marketplace. Its passage directly overhead at midnight was the divine signal that the cosmos consented to continue. The tension was absolute. If the stars did not align, it was over. But when that cluster reached its zenith, the high priest would take a fire drill, and on the chest of the captive warrior, who represented the god Tezcatlipoca himself, he would work to kindle a new flame. This was not just lighting a fire, it was the rebirth of the sun's very energy drawn from the body of a divine stand-in. The first spark that caught on the bark tinder was a moment of collective resurrection. Runners, their torches lit from this primal source, became streaks of light in the darkness, carrying the new fire to every city, town, and village in a radiating wave of relief. Hearths were relit, new pottery was made, and life surged back with renewed vigor. The ceremony was not superstition, it was the ultimate act of cosmic maintenance. It was a society-wide performance of their most sacred belief, that human ritual action was the essential fuel that kept the universe in motion. They did not just hope the sun would rise, they believed they had to earn it, to literally relight it through precision, sacrifice, and unwavering collective will. To call it nonsense is to ignore the profound psychological and theological power of a people who, every 52 years, stared into the void and with a spark struck on a human chest, chose to create another cycle of time. The very word we use to describe them, God, is a translation that betrays the entire concept. Myth 27 insists that an Aztec deity can be understood through the same lens as a Greek or Roman god, a discrete, personified being with a clear personality and portfolio. This is perhaps the most profound misunderstanding of all, because it tries to fit a force of nature into the shape of a human story. The Nahuatl word most often translated as God is Teotl. But Teotl did not mean an immortal person living on a mountain. It meant a sacred, animating force, a kind of divine energy that was both singular and plural, a fundamental power that could crystallize into countless forms. Think of it not as a pantheon of individuals, but as a single, vast ocean of sacred power. A wave, a current, a whirlpool, and a drop of spray are all distinct manifestations of that one ocean, each with its own characteristics, yet all made of the same essential substance. That is Teotl. The sun blazing at noon was a manifestation of Teotl, and so was the gentle breeze that carried the scent of flowers, and so was the heartblood soaking into the temple stone. They were not separate gods in competition, they were different expressions of the same underlying sacred reality. This explains the breathtaking fluidity we have already seen. A single force, like the power of the night sky, could be recognized as Tezcatlipoca in his role as the omnipresent tester of kings, and also as Chalchiuhtlicue, the lord of the night, and also as the collective terror of the star demons, the Tezcatlipoca. These were not different gods, they were different faces of the same cosmic principle, emphasized for a specific ritual or story. This concept shatters the Western model of a tidy family tree. Teotl could inhabit a statue, a mountain, a particularly grand old tree, or a captive warrior chosen as the Ixipla. A king was not just a political leader, he was a vessel for Teotl, his authority a divine charge. A sprouting maize plant was Teotl manifesting as life. A lightning bolt was Teotl manifesting as sudden, destructive power. This is why their rituals were not merely prayers to distant beings, but acts of participation and manipulation. By offering blood, they were feeding the sacred energy itself, strengthening the particular manifestation of Teotl that they needed, whether it was the solar force to rise or the watery force to bring rain. To call Chalchiuhtlicue a war god is like calling a hurricane a wind god. It captures one function but misses the immense, impersonal power behind it. The Aztecs did not worship personalities. They negotiated with the fundamental forces of a universe that was alive, conscious, and dangerously dynamic in every rock, river, and ray of light. Their religion was a science of sacred energy, a constant effort to engage with the animating pulse of everything that existed. When we reduce Teotl to the simple word God, we lose the awe and the terror of a world where everything was divine, and where humanity's role was not to obey masters, but to sustain the very energy from which they themselves were made. This cosmic energy of Teotl manifested in forms that utterly defy our modern stereotypes. A persistent 28th myth insists that female deities in the Aztec world were passive, domestic figures, confined to gentle roles of fertility and the hearth. This could not be more wrong. The goddesses of this pantheon were forces of raw creation, terrifying destruction, and profound transformation, wielding power that often dwarfed that of their male counterparts. We have already met Coatlicue, the Earth Mother, whose serpent skirt and necklace of hearts reveal a deity who is both womb and tomb, the silent, consuming ground from which the sun itself is born. She is not a nurturing figure in a soft sense. She is the planet itself, passive only in the way a mountain is passive, an immovable reality that gives and takes life on a scale beyond human morality. Then there is Tezcatlipoca, Seven Serpent, the goddess of mature maize. She is often depicted cradling a double ear of corn, a symbol of abundance. Yet her festivals could involve the sacrifice of a young girl representing the goddess, her severed head paraded through fields as a sacred seed to ensure the harvest. Here, the goddess of sustenance demands the ultimate sustenance in return, her gentle image belying a cycle as stark and necessary as the harvest itself. But to truly shatter the stereotype, we must encounter Quetzalcoatl, the obsidian butterfly. Her name sounds delicate, but she was a fearsome warrior goddess, a celestial demon associated with the starry night. She was often depicted with obsidian butterfly wings, each as sharp as a blade, and claws of jaguar or eagle. Quetzalcoatl ruled over the paradise of Tamonchon, a place of origin, but she was also a leader of the Tezcatlipoca, the star demons who would descend to devour humanity if the sun failed. She embodies a terrifying duality, the beautiful, fluttering insect whose wings are made of the sharpest volcanic glass, a symbol of both ethereal beauty and lethal celestial violence. Perhaps no goddess better encapsulates the complex, transformative power of the feminine divine than Tlaloc, a figure whose domains seem contradictory at first glance. She was the goddess of filth, of vice, of sexual misdeeds, and of the trash that accumulates in a community. She was the embodiment of moral and physical corruption, the one who inspired lust, greed, and disorder. Yet, in a stunning theological twist, she was also the goddess of purification, cleansing, and confession. She held the power to both cause sin and to absolve it. This was not hypocrisy, but a profound understanding of cycles. Tlaloc represented the necessary accumulation of filth, both literal and spiritual, that is part of human life. But she also provided the means for its transformation. Through confession to her priests, a person could speak their misdeeds, and in doing so, the spiritual filth was transferred to the goddess herself, who consumed it and transformed it into something clean. She was the divine recycler of sin. In one of her most striking aspects, she is shown giving birth while squatting on a temazcal, a sweat lodge, a place of intense physical and spiritual cleansing. This image ties her directly to midwives and the transformative, dangerous power of childbirth itself, another process that involves blood, pain, and the emergence of new life from a state of profound physical vulnerability. These goddesses were not supporting characters. They were the earth that births and consumes, the maize that feeds and demands blood, the star demon that threatens annihilation, and the cosmic force that takes our worst failures and, through a sacred process, makes us whole again. Their power was active, dangerous, and essential, governing the most critical thresholds between life and death, purity and corruption, order and chaos. The final, crushing blow came not from a failure of faith, but from a catastrophic success of foreign steel and invisible disease. In the smoldering ruins of Tenochtitlan, a theological crisis of unimaginable scale unfolded. If their rituals had been so precise, if their offerings had been so lavish, how could their world have been shattered? The easy colonial answer, the 29th myth, declares this proved the Aztec gods were false, weak idols overthrown by the one true Christian God. But for the surviving Mexica grappling with the unthinkable, the explanation likely lay within the terrifying logic of their own cosmology, not outside it. They did not see a world ended, but an age concluded. Their own history was a series of 5 suns, each world destroyed by jaguars, wind, fire, and flood. The conquest, with its thunderous cannons they called fire serpents, its invisible sickness that slew more than any army, and its final drowning of their city in a siege, must have felt like the cataclysm of the 5th sun, the long-prophesied destruction by earthquake. Their world did end, not because their gods were false, but because the cosmic cycle had reached its terminus. Perhaps the Spanish and their potent saints were not the servants of a new god, but the manifestation of powerful, victorious Teotl they had not previously encountered. In their fluid pantheon, new gods could be incorporated, their power acknowledged and added to the celestial roster. The rapid, profound syncretism that followed the conquest is not a story of simple surrender, but of breathtaking spiritual resilience. The Virgin of Guadalupe did not appear in a vacuum. She appeared on the hill of Tepeyac, the precise site of a former temple to Tonantzin, an Earth Mother goddess revered as our sacred mother. The indigenous people did not just accept a NEW Chinese letter, they recognized the sacred force of the feminine divine returning to a hallowed location, now wearing a new guise they could venerate within the imposed Catholic framework. This pattern repeated everywhere. Saints became stand-ins for old deities, their feast days aligning with pre-Hispanic festivals. The Day of the Dead seamlessly wove Catholic All Souls' Day with the ancient, month-long veneration of the ancestors and Moctezuma, the Lady of the Dead. The cross itself was adopted not just as a Christian symbol, but as the sacred tree of life, a new axis mundi connecting the 3 worlds. This was not the death of a belief system, but its metamorphosis. The fundamental understanding of a universe animated by sacred, reciprocal energy could not be erased by swords or sermons. It simply went underground, wearing a Catholic mask to survive. The gods were not proven false, they were driven into exile, waiting in the stones of old pyramids, in the shapes of the mountains, and in the hearts of those who remembered the old ways, biding their time for the next turn of the cosmic wheel. That final, quiet transformation of gods into saints brings us to the 30th and perhaps most humbling myth of all, the comfortable assumption that our modern understanding of these stories is anywhere near complete. We have journeyed through 29 layers of distortion, from bearded Quetzalcoatl to bloodthirsty Chalchiuhtlicue, and in each case we have found a deeper, more complex truth waiting beneath the surface. But here we must confront the ultimate limit. Every explanation we have offered, every corrected misconception, is itself a reconstruction, a best guess pieced together from fragments that survived a deliberate and devastating cultural fire. The greatest unexplained mystery surrounding the Aztec gods is not a single bizarre ritual or a contradictory myth. It is the full, living, breathing reality of their belief system as it was actually experienced by the people of Tenochtitlan. We are forever listening to an echo, trying to reconstruct the original song from its reverberations in a canyon of ruin. Our view is filtered through a triple lens, each layer adding its own distortion. The first lens is conquest. Nearly every written account we have comes from the victors or from indigenous survivors speaking under Spanish rule, their words shaped by trauma, censorship, and the need to explain the cataclysm that had befallen them. The second lens is time. We have lost the sound of the hymns, the precise cadence of the chants, the collective emotion in the plaza during a festival, the intimate family prayers whispered at a household altar. These were the living textures of faith, and they are gone. The third and most subtle lens is cultural translation. We are trying to understand the concept of Teotl, a sacred, animating force, using the Western framework of God, a personalized being. We are trying to map a fluid, overlapping spiritual energy onto a fixed family tree of deities. It is like trying to describe the color of the wind. We are using the wrong vocabulary for the phenomenon. So when we say a myth is busted, like the idea of endless daily sacrifice, we are not discovering the absolute truth. We are simply moving closer to a more probable, evidence-based interpretation. But the lived experience, the visceral certainty that feeding the sun with your own blood was a sacred duty that kept your children safe, that profound inner reality remains just out of reach. Each broken statue, each faded codex page is a locked door. We can study the lock, we can guess what is behind it, but we can never truly turn the key and step inside. This is not a failure of scholarship, but a necessary humility. The Aztec spiritual world was a vast, sophisticated, and coherent universe of meaning, a cosmology where every act from farming to warfare to childbirth was a note in a grand, cosmic symphony. We have recovered some of the sheet music, we can identify a few of the instruments, but we will never hear the symphony as it was performed, and that is the final, haunting mystery. It reminds us that history is not just about facts we can prove, but about truths we can only approach, worlds that live on only in the shadows they cast across our own. The myths we have explored are not just errors to be corrected, they are the ghostly fingerprints of a lost reality, pressing against the glass of time, forever asking us to look closer, to wonder more, and to acknowledge how much we will simply never know. So the story was never about simple gods or savage rituals. We have walked through 30 layers of myth and misunderstanding, from bearded foreigners to bloodthirsty sun gods, and at every turn we have found not a civilization defined by brutality, but one animated by a breathtakingly complex and poetic vision of the cosmos. Their world was not a flat stage for superstition, but a living, sacred machine of immense sophistication, where every act, from the sweep of a broom to the offering of a heart, was a note in a grand cosmic symphony. They were not worshipping monsters, they were negotiating with the fundamental forces of existence itself, with a theology so fluid and profound it could absorb entire pantheons and explain the end of worlds. The persistence of these simplified myths tells us less about the Aztecs and far more about ourselves. We cling to stories of pale gods and daily slaughter because they fit a familiar narrative, one that makes the other seem either foolish or frightening, and in doing so, justifies conquest or allows us to feel superior. It is easier to dismiss a people as bloodthirsty than to grapple with the unsettling beauty of their belief that life requires life, that corn is divine flesh, and that the wind is a god's breath. We force their fluid teotl into the rigid boxes of our own religious vocabulary, losing the awe in translation. Their true mystery is not in the shock of their rituals, but in the sheer, humbling depth of their thought, a lost symphony we can only hear in fragments. I would love to know which of these 30 myths surprised you the most. Was it the goddess whose wings were blades, or the understanding that their calendar foretold renewal, not doom? Share your thoughts below and let me know what other historical enigmas you would like to explore. For more journeys into the unexplained corners of our past, be sure to subscribe.